Google Translate. Synonyms. So let's see if we can pull up some synonyms. I can't keep calling these subrealms. Well, I could keep calling them subrealms, but that's not really where I want to go with that. Synonyms, which is one of my other favorite searches on Google. Yeah, Wikipedia and Google Translate and synonyms are three of my most used things because I can come up with story ideas and character concepts, items and worlds, but names is something I struggle with. And it was bad enough at one point that when I was doing some planning a few years ago for a different game design or a story that I was working on, I did a job where I went door to door, and they'd give me a big list of people's doors that I had to go on. So an address, a name, a first name, and a last name of the persons or people that I had to talk to at any given address. And I've unfortunately lost it by now, but I used to take the first names and take the last names and keep them on separate files so that I could shuffle them and mix them. And we had a pretty good mix of ethnic groups on the list that I searched or that I went to the doors of. So I had this list of multiple different nationality style names that I could shuffle and move around and get Stephen Johnson and Michael Baxter or something like that. And so I could do it at random, and which is much easier for me because if I try to say like, who does this character sound like their name should be, I always do terribly at it. It always sounds fake to me. It never sounds like a real name. Whereas if random chance were to pick one, I go, I guess that works. So I need to find a way to do that again. I need to build some lists, and it's going to be trickier for my settings here because I have the overarching setting, which is the Empyrean realm, and I've sort of set it up as my dwarven members are very Slavic, and my Fae, my elves, are very sort of East Asian in style, and the gnomes are a little bit more Dutch and slightly Eastern European, a little bit Norwegian in there too, I would wager. So they have distinctive patterns that we don't have large communities of most of those sets over here. But so where was I? I was looking up synonyms, trying to figure out how I'm going to name the subrealms. Whoa, I'm trying to think. It wouldn't be like duchy or barony. They're distinctly their own worlds. Let's try just do worlds. So the one I'm going to predominantly focus on tonight is Sentinels. My superheroes in tabards, I guess, is the best way I can summarize it simply. So taking the idea of doing a Dungeons and Dragons setting where the characters are superheroes, but not like a Masks and Marvels kind of three-tone. The way I think of this is very similar to sort of what is the really well-known one done by, I have a small collection of comics that I've maintained. I sold off a lot of my larger collection years ago, but there was a series of comics that were done in a very painterly style called Marvels. Let's see if I can pull up an image on here. I'm sure the camera's going to freak out when I point the screen at it, but a mini-series. It was I think it had 4 or 5 issues. Yep, there we go. And so their covers and the interior art were so they're done by Ross. What was his name? Alex Ross. Painted by Alex Ross. So let's pull out here Marvel's Alex Ross. And pull up a Google image search. Here we go. See if we find a good one here. So you have, and that's, I was going to say, the other one he's really well known for, I believe, is Kingdom Come with Superman. And I really dig that style. That, let's see if I can just do an Alex Ross search. What he's famous for is like a very distinctive. Oh, come on. There's got to be a better one of that shot. So like it's very, very classic comic book. Yeah, refocus. There we go. And he's really good at pulling off that realistic, like that Superman and some of the Batman figures here, they look very much like the actor who played him on TV years ago. And so that ability to pull that look off, I kind of like, as much as these are story worlds that I'm building, they do hearken to a certain amount of visual aesthetic. When I talk about the Empyrean realms and the different races that I'm using there, I've not only marked them as different racial names and the different races that I'm using for this, I've given them each an art style, which I think represents them. So when I'm talking about the dwarves in the Empyrean realm, I'm hardcore taking a Art Deco approach to them. A very Sky Captain in the World Tomorrow. So that sort of, it's hard to describe it any other way if you're just not familiar with Art Deco. Like Art Deco has a very distinctive style. So the dwarves, I went with Art Deco. For the Fae, I'm going with a very kind of Gothic cathedral style with a little bit of an Eastern flair. Whereas the dwarves are a deco with a stone and crystal flair. So it's not quite metal. There's a lot of metal in deco. I'm doing it slightly variant on them. And the gnomes are more of an Art Nouveau with maybe a hint of H.R. Giger in there. And I did things like that for each race, including the Borean races. The 4 primary Borean races also have an art style. And doing that was sort of where I was going with keeping in mind an art style that embodies the world that you're playing in. And I want to keep some of that flavor going forward. So in the Sentinel setting, I do want to kind of have some of that Alex Ross aesthetic element to it. So if you look at some of like the modern comic books and the costumes they wear, there's a very different feel to their look. Whereas like when you look at the artwork for what he's done here for these different comic book series, the art style for these, it's not skin-tight rubber suits like the Batman movies that we've seen recently, or the leather outfits that we see in the X-Men movie, or like what they've done for the Avengers movies. These are more, they're cloth. You feel the fibers in them when you look at those images. There's a very distinctively stylistic, but it's not just that it's a jumpsuit. Like that Superman, the parallel on these not great here, but looking at not the hand-drawn one by somebody else, but if you look at the picture of the Superman character on I guess it's on your right, if I did that right, that outfit that character's in, that's a suit of long johns. That's not a spandex suit. That's like a cotton bodysuit. And so it feels less fake to me to think. Foggy. Oh, my connection's failed. Cool. There we go. Refocused. And the feel I want to do is not only just saying like these are real people, but it isn't a world of spandex or unstable molecular structures on suits so that they're form-fitting like in the comic books. I want it to be somebody who's wearing actual stockings and a tabard. The old the tabards they're sort of like a single rectangle of cloth folded over, neck hole to get your head through is sort of a plain circle with a slit down the front so that it can open a little bit further to get your head through. And then it just sets here and you can lace up the front of the tabard if you need to. And then it's closed on the sides here, just high enough to stop underneath the armpit to give you range of motion of your arms. That's the whole thing. If you think of pictures of Prince Valiant, let's see if we can pull some of those up. As much as it's messing with the camera. Prince Valiant images. Can we get an image of Prince Valiant? Okay, here we go. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Prince Valiant in a tabard with a cape. Tell me that's not perfectly suited for doing a superhero outfit. So you build a world where that's the superhero outfit, not the spandex-clad superhero. That fits very well with that Alex Ross approach to the artwork, where it's a piece of cloth and not just like a skin-tight rubber suit or some such thing, like painted on something or other. And so that visual of the outfit, the aesthetic, and having that very painted, not quite, I wouldn't call it a noir style of setting the face in partial shadow, but dramatic lighting at least in the posed pictures that you do for an Alex Ross style painting. And so having that dramatic, heroic, and having characters be able to have some of that standing, you know, as a champion above the people, and you have that lighting looking sort of up and the shadow from a side, and like very dramatic visual aesthetic is what I'm working for. But I also want to set this realm in the realm of serious philosophical examination and sociological and psychological examination of the hero genre. So it's going to have some of that dramatic, like some of these pictures have Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman looking like gods among mortals. And it's awing and it's very neat. And there is a place for that to feel in the setting where kids in that setting see the monsters that are in the world around them and see these gods that will save them all. And they imagine that they will be friends of these gods, or maybe even someday they can be a god like that. And that's awesome. But I want to have a little bit of that Watchmen. I hear The Boys is very like this, and Umbrella Academy stop and really take a look at it and go like, yeah, that's the story that the media sells. But all of these people, these gods, they're human. And the monsters that you're thinking of them defending you against, they're not always the way you think they are. And so having that sort of like, I want to be able to do DC and Marvel together. For me, I've always been a Marvel fan. I've always liked the idea of the X-Men, the misfit, deformed, and misunderstood heroes who do the heroic thing even for the people who don't like them. I've always loved that storyline more than I liked DC. DC, I always struggled with specifically because they always do this sort of like, this is not a person. So Spider-Man is a human being with talents that are unique, and he sees a value of applying his talents to helping others. But he is always Peter Parker. The Spider-Man is the costume he puts on to protect Peter Parker from the Spider-Man's life. He's always Peter Parker in a costume. Superman's costume, and I think they made this point in Kill Bill. Superman's costume is Clark Kent. Batman, he's the archetype of the gadget-carrying, amazing detective super planner. When his parents were killed, he went and he became Batman. Batman was the one who studied the martial arts. Batman was the one who built the technology. Batman was the one who does everything that he does. Bruce Wayne is what he dresses up as in order to reconnect with being human. Wonder Woman is Wonder Woman first, and Diana afterwards. And so DC has always struck me as very, it's much more like a Greek mythology theme. It's Hercules, it's Odysseus, it's epic tales of archetypal demigods in the realm of human beings. It's demigods playing against monsters and demons in our world. Whereas Marvel is us, people like us, Daredevil, Spider-Man, who gain access to a world of powerful conflict and have to choose whether or not they set aside a normal life because of a responsibility to other people like themselves. And so Marvel has always felt very different for me from DC. And I kind of want to build a world in Sentinels that's both of those. I want there to be those archetypal champions, and I want them to be fighting against archetypal villains. But at the same time, I also want to have those human beings given a chance to play at being heroic through circumstances that are granted to them at certain points. And so overall, I feel like it's possible to pull this off, but it's going to be a very interesting approach to it. It's going to end up leaning heavily towards the Marvel end of the spectrum, I feel, just because of the way I've sort of built. Once you have a world where you question whether or not archetypes are appropriate, it sort of makes that story much more Marvel. So with the Sentinel setting, what we're looking at hopefully doing is you start out with a group of kids. And I think the way I want to start this out, that setting is you start out as a group of kids, and very similar to the way I want to start out the Empyrean realm, where you're a group of kids coming away from school or whatever the equivalent is in the setting that we're doing. In the Empyrean realm, it's your apprentice program for the skills that you're learning. It could be something similar to this. You're in a medieval city. There's the king of the city that you belong to, city-state that you live in, and their guard, their city guard, they're going to be very similar to. I don't want to necessarily equate them to the Sentinels from Marvel Comics, but I do want them to be sort of like a task force specifically designed to manage the unusual threats that superheroic characters can mean for your city. And so I do want them to be sort of human. They're sort of a human guard. They're a human police force for the city. And then you have their sort of strained relationship with the Batmans and the Supermans and the Avengers of the setting. Now, I'm thinking, as I'm sitting here talking about this right now, I'm thinking one of the things I potentially want to do is, this isn't necessarily the whole of the kingdom in one city. I think I want it to be sort of like, this is Metropolis or Gotham City that your heroes start out in. But there's also the wider United States equivalent, that is the entire kingdom. And that entire kingdom may be the one that has a sort of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. situation going on, because I think a S.H.I.E.L.D. agency would be good. And that would be ones that occasionally enlist powered individuals, but overwhelmingly, they're going to be human, semi-militarized, somewhat spy organization like S.H.I.E.L.D. is often portrayed. So having a S.H.I.E.L.D. organization, so let's start pulling some of this together here. We're going to have S.H.I.E.L.D. We're going to have the kingdom, the city. Let's just call it Metropolis for now. And so we're going to want that. The Kingdom Guards are police force with a special task force specifically designed to handle supernatural events. Well, no, that might be the Metropolis. Each city might have its own police force. There you go. Yeah. And part of this story setting that I want to deal with is going to be focusing on the idea that within this kingdom, there is a tolerance of superpowered beings doing certain things. It's sort of like the the Avengers were tolerated so long as everybody felt they were okay. But the moment they thought they were causing too much destruction, there was questions, and they started trying to impose the, what was it, the Wachovia Accords or whatever. But that's for certain types of heroes. That is never a hand that's extended towards the X-Men. The X-Men are on the fringes. They are dangerous mutants. And there are organizations out there that want to register them and make them disappear. So I want to have some of that element going on, especially because the mutants in my setting are going to be people who look like traditional fantasy monsters. You encounter an ogre? Oh dear, what are we going to do? We must destroy this monster. Well, that ogre was your math teacher before you changed. That's a very distinctive thing that we want to be the hidden clue. And that comes up in that Marvel's comics series I was talking about with the art by Alex Ross. One of those comics is exploring the concept of mutants. And I kind of want to borrow a lot from that story. And part of that was you have this news reporter that reports on these superheroes, the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man's conflict. Spider-Man's always kind of like still portrayed partly by the Bugle as somewhat nefarious. But you have these Avenger battles versus other beings, and they're seen as heroic champions. But when this reporter goes home, there's talks about local, like, community watch members hunting down somebody in the streets because they've heard there's a dangerous mutant in the neighborhood. So they're trying to hunt this person down. You know, they're a danger to family and children in the neighborhood, so you got to hunt them. And it's treated as like wow. And it's just like really, really setting that example up. And part of that story was the reporter's kids. He thinks they're taking care of a puppy in their garage, but it's a little mutant girl. And she's been hiding out because people are out to try to kill her. And it's through that, like, tolerating his kids taking care of a puppy and nothing coming wrong from it, and then eventually uncovering that this isn't a puppy, this is a little girl, and seeing her face to face and realizing what's going on with this. That was an amazing story, and I want to play off of some of those elements. I don't know that I'm going to do a lot of the boys kind of where you have the Justice League kind of heroes, and they're just fully corrupted by their power. They get away with murder and screw-ups and just horrible conduct because they're celebrities. And I don't want to do that story. That story's kind of tired at this point. But I also, like, that's not the direction I necessarily want it to go. I would rather focus more on not the indiscretions and corruption among the powerful and the elite. And I want to be more focused on what it means to be seen as different and how one moves through the world when it's not just that the characters are different. Like, you start out with the characters being teenagers, and they want to be like other teenagers. But at some point, you're going to have the realization that, oh no, something more has been put on the plate of each of these characters, that your players are playing these characters. You want to have that moment of it being sort of like, oh no, so all this time I was acting like a teenager, but fate has decided I become something else. So who am I? figuring out, based off of the hand you were dealt, who are you? Where do you fit into this society? And sometimes that where do you fit into society question is answered by society telling you where you fit. Whether or not that's the right fit for you. Like you could be a normal teenage kid in a fantasy setting of medieval times, worshiping certain people you consider to be heroic characters. And then one moment, the roll of the dice has decided that you're going to turn into a harpy. Your body shifts and you become this monster that everybody else has feared. Well, there's absolutely no reason necessarily to fear you because of that change. But society still sees you as a monster. This is the hand you've been dealt. Where do you fit into society? You don't. They don't want you. And how do you handle that ramification? And that story is something that sort of plays out in the real world in aspects of dealing with gender identity for some people, sexual orientation, mixed racial heritage. You have the concepts of faith or certain other aspects where people are like, yeah, no, we don't have a place for that in our community. You're not welcome here. And that sense of alienation is something that a lot of people, specifically with certain heritages, like the Superman style character where you're the last son of Krypton. You didn't decide to be a son of Krypton. You were just born that way. You didn't decide to be an elf in this setting. You were just born that way. You're just trying to figure out how you can fit in and become a contributing member to that society. But another section of society where that comes into play is the disabled. This is something a little more, with a chronic health condition or a disability that comes into play. This is something that is sort of near and dear to my heart for some of this, where you examine the idea of like, you were a normal teenager at one point. But someday, through some random roll of some fated chance, something in you changed that made it so that the world that's built for everybody else doesn't quite work the same way for you. And what does that mean? How do you figure out how to move through this world again? And who you are is changed. Like having a chronic health concern, I'm sure you already know some of this, is it changes how other people treat you. It changes what you're able to do in a world that's not built to handle your limitations. And you didn't choose to have that be something that happened to you. That just happened to you. And it doesn't make you less of a person. And it doesn't mean you're not still you. But at a certain point, it does change you. When I first became sick with my chronic health problem, it became very important for me to come to a point where I said, look, yes, I am sick, but I am not a sick person who writes stories or creates art. I am a writer and an artist who is sick. It's very much more important for me to make that distinction. I'm not a sick person who makes art. I'm an artist who is sick. That's the important part of that identity. And so when you take a role like this, and that's sort of why I hinted at the other day where I'm talking about how like building these settings isn't just about telling a simple story. Good stories make us think about aspects of ourselves and our world. And there's a philosophical approach, a sociological, a psychological, You play with somebody's emotions because it's important to get them to empathize and understand and explore viewpoints that they otherwise might not get. So in building a setting like Sentinels, I want to set that scenario up where the Empyrean realm has its own mysteries and struggles and philosophies and questions, and some of them bleed down into this setting because you're going to fall from the Empyrean realm into Sentinels. This setting itself has its own set of lessons and questions and riddles and meanings. And part of that is, what does it mean when you are so thoroughly changed by paths you didn't choose? When you become disabled, or you contract a chronic illness, or you develop an immunodeficiency of some kind, or not immunodeficiency, autoimmune disease, there you go. When these things happen to you, they change how you move through the world. They change how other people treat you. They change how people react in circumstances around you. For a long time, because I struggle with the ability to digest certain things, it's way better now than it used to be, but for a very long time, people would chronically apologize for eating in front of me because they knew I couldn't eat what they were eating. People to date still ask what sort of foods should be at family gatherings that I might be able to do. For a long time, I couldn't do anything. I had to prep my own food, bring it with me, and that was just, if we're going to have a family gathering where there is going to be eating, which is every family gathering, I'm bringing my own food. And if that family gathering is too far away, if it's going to take me 3 or 4 hours to get there, my food is going to spoil on that trip. So I can't do that trip. So if my family made that plan, I had to accept that I just wasn't able to go. And I'm just not part of the family for that trip. And that kind of paying conscious attention to what are the ramifications of a change like that that's been done to you. What does that mean? Who am I at that point? Am I a part of that family? Am I invested in the family in that same way? Am I bitter about that? No. Like, you have to figure out how you identify with the circumstances you're in, how your relationships and your identity change in the eyes of others. And that's sort of what I want to play at with Sentinel setting. Through the metaphor of characters being changed in multiple different ways. And some of this it doesn't have to all be like the disability stuff. So like the Inhuman, where you are changed by an event to release some aspect of yourself. You become a bit of an outsider, but you're not a mutant. But the mutants, they're monsters. They're not like us. Why would we invite them to a family gathering? As soon as you manifest as a monster, I'm sorry, but you're that black sheep of the family that nobody talks about. You're disowned. And that's a thing that it happens to some people for all sorts of circumstances in the world. The enchanted item is something where you come into something through luck. Whether you win the lottery or you get a chance that nobody else gets. Is it something you've earned? Not really. It's not a thing you've succeeded at. That would be something more along the lines of somebody who studies magic and sorcery and becomes a Doctor Strange kind of character. But the enchanted item is an object you've found. And it's a matter of luck. And in those circumstances, you get somebody who questions whether you were the right one. If you remember the Lord of the Rings movie, where everybody questions why it should come to Frodo to have such a powerful artifact as this ring. An artifact we could do so much to change the course of the fate of all of our peoples. Why should it come to one so small to carry such a weight that could benefit all of mankind? And that sort of jealousy, that temptation to want what they have. So enchanted items, mutants, inhumans, the demi-humans where you're not human, but you're trying to blend in. That's, as an adopted kid, I can tell you, there is a sense of like, you're not my people. To a certain degree, you're not my people. I'm adopted into the family, and you are my family. But there's a part of me that's not from here. I'm not like so much of my family. And there is that sense of like, I'm from two worlds. There's a family I'm from, and there's a family that I've been part of. But they're not the same thing. And so that really sense of like, between two worlds. You can work in this world just fine. You can do lots of things, and you can love the people here and everything. But you came from outside of that world. You're in it now, but there still is part of you that is from outside that world. And then the inflicted powers like the SpiderMan or the Daredevil, that's really more of a question of what one does when one acquires power. With great power comes great responsibility. And Spider-Man is the icon of that set, I think. It's the idea of like, this is something that happened to you, and it gives you a certain set of gifts. And I guess the other equivalent of that would be like, if you're a child prodigy, somewhere along the way, somebody discovered that you are a very gifted musician. And recognizing that opportunity, they give you the training you need to take that skill to a world-class level. So it's like those kids, those 8 or 9-year-old kids who are smart enough that they can pass out of high school and into college level courses at 8 or 9 years old. That's really cool. It's amazing. We're all in awe of them, and we think these are amazing kids. They're going to do amazing things for the world. And they are oftentimes tortured by the very fact that the things that make them so distinctly unique make them not fit in the rest of the world as well. And so they struggle with those other aspects of the rest of the world. One of my absolute favorite books, and I feel bad because I don't think I've read it in a couple of years. It used to be a tradition that once a year I would read this book. This is just a reminder. It was Children of the Atom by Wilmar Shiras. And this book is about it's a collection of short stories. And the very first short story is called In Hiding. And I read it when I was in high school in a science fiction anthology series. And I read that story, and I was a little disturbed and haunted by it for a few days. And it's not a disturbing or haunting story particularly. It's really just a story about this kid who in school is doing just average, and he doesn't participate a lot. It's almost like he's intentionally trying not to appear on the radar. It's sort of like that saying, like, if you check somebody's background and there's absolutely nothing there, then something's been meddled with, because everybody's got something in their past. It's not necessarily true, but that concept of if your record's too clean, it's fake. And so this kid is his passage through the schooling system is showing up as textbook perfect average normal person. Nobody is textbook normal average person. So it sends off a few kind of like, something doesn't feel right. And so they talk to this kid, and he slips up a little bit and reveals that no, like, He's used correspondence courses to get college degrees in things that other adults take years to do, and he does like that. He's not normal, but he's deathly afraid of appearing not normal to other people, because he's not going to be able to live a life in that world if everybody else knows what makes him different. And so that kind of, I loved that story, but the reason it haunted me was like, I'm reading through these things about this kid in junior high school, early high school age, working on all these projects of writing a novel based off of the moves in a chess game, doing a symphony based off of human biorhythms. These are ideas I had had. And so I'm like, oh, that's way too close to home. And so it was sort of like I couldn't quite handle that. I had really I played with these things on my own time and didn't share them or talk about them too much with other than a friend or two, and only piecemeal here and there, never like unload the whole lot of everything on one person. But here's this story that lays it all out and says like, oh no, this kid is a mutant, a weirdo, a stranger, an outcast from society because of this, but also he's an amazing, and like, I didn't want the responsibility of being amazing with my ideas, and I certainly didn't want to imagine that I was going to be, shunned by society because they don't know how to handle me. But the other thing this character talks about in the setting is, look, he says it to an adult. This is a kid in his 8 or 9, I think he was 12 years old, maybe. I can't remember specifically the age range. But at a certain point, he looks at the adult who's helping him or learning about him and says to him something to the effect of, the idea of having a relationship with with a person who's not like him, the idea of having a relationship with another average normal human is sort of like an average normal human having a relationship with a puppy. There's only so far you want to go down that path. And so when you have this kid who's so removed from the normal human experience, having a family, having a loved one with whom you may raise a family someday, becomes less likely, because you're just in different worlds. It's a struggle. I don't want to say you're never going to have a situation work out for you, but it's a struggle to find how you fit. And there's some examples definitely of certain people who out really young, where at the age of late high school age, they drop off the map. They become reclusive hermits. And there's a sort of a pattern of substance abuse that works its way into that, where they dumb themselves to numb what makes them different. And so like, that's definitely something you can play with in this setting. This Sentinel setting wants to dabble with a little bit of all of that, looking at the question of, the jealousy of you getting an artifact that grants you power, the fear of you being a monster, and the equivalent of, developing a condition that eliminates you from being able to socialize and turns you into the black sheep of the family, the one that nobody talks about at family gatherings. The idea that you might develop an ability that sets you so far out of the rest of society that you don't know how to blend into that, and the burnout that can happen. Or you literally just being not like everybody else, being adopted and trying to blend in, but you're trying to pass as human at that point. And that sort of idea that we have this tendency in especially in this culture, in this country right now, you're an alien, you're an outsider, and we don't treat that well. And so these are all tropes. These are all qualities that we all confront in our current society. And like many science fiction and many fantasy stories, they employ the examination of these topics in a slightly more safe environment of characters in exaggerated hypothetical circumstances. Oh, that's not the president of the United States. That's the king of this fantasy realm. That's not talking about the relationships of different racial groups in our society. That's talking about the differences between dwarves and elves. That's not Asian people. This is a different circumstance, but it examines the circumstances that parallel into our real world. You can examine those relationships, those struggles, and see the parallels between them without doing a heavy-handed exploration of it. And so I guess my approach to talking about this tonight has made this sound way more literary. This isn't what is it? Murder of Crows. It is To Kill a Mockingbird. There you go. This isn't To Kill a Mockingbird. I'm not working on an epic piece of American literature that makes you examine the race relations in this country. That's not what I'm working on. But I want to leave space for playing a little bit with some of these concepts in an overarching setting. I want you to feel like you can build a character that can be depressed about this condition they've contracted that have changed them in the face of their whole family. You want to be able to provide the opportunity for that play to happen. And I think I've done a fairly decent job of setting up the setting for it. I think we're coming close to an hour here. I didn't think I was going to ramble this long and hard about it, but I can come back and do a little more talking about Sentinels tomorrow. I don't know if I'll do another long rant. I do. This may space out the other settings that I'll explore later in the week, I think. Do we have enough days in the week to cover a night or two for each of the settings? Probably. Today's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So, setting. I hope that was interesting. I know I've been dwelling pretty heavily on the Empyrean realm, and I will still kind of occasionally dip back into it because it is really like I'm really enjoying how well it's gelling into a greater cosmology. All right, so I will call it here tonight. My butt hurts because I've been sitting still too long. Not that you need to know that, but take care and good night. I'll catch you tomorrow. If all goes well. It should. There shouldn't be any more problems. All right.